Hello Raptors fans, and welcome back to Raptors Report. Today we are going to be discussing the Toronto Raptors' 110-105 victory over the Minnesota Timberwolves. And they are on a 2-game winning streak, and Scottie Barnes is back. That's right, Scottie Barnes, the team's best player, has finally returned and suited up and has some funky red glasses, but he looked great. I was very happy with his return to the Toronto Raptors, and they managed to get the dub. We will discuss that, but first I want to talk about the Toronto Raptors and their trajectory as a team, because I think that things have changed, and with Scottie back in the lineup, everything is starting to look a lot more competitive. Things are starting to make much more sense, and I am starting to get the feeling that perhaps the Toronto Raptors may not be quite as bad as their record indicates. And I think that if you were hoping for the Toronto Raptors to tank the rest of the season to end up with a high pick, you might be a little disappointed. You might be hoping for some trades soon if that is what you want, because I don't think that they are going to be losing 80% of their games for the remainder of the season. And I think that there was a very handsome YouTuber, very smart guy, who was saying something about this in his season preview. Let me see if I can remember. Cakewalk matchups. And so what I'm thinking might happen is that there might be a bit of whiplash in the fan base, because if you've been paying attention, this coming season is kind of a race for Cooper Flag. Yep, that sounds about right to me. Yeah, the Toronto Raptors seem to have, I wouldn't say weather the early storm, because they got beat down. They had the worst record in the league for a little while, mainly due to the injuries, that horrible West Coast road trip, the really, really bad schedule. It was a pretty brutal stretch of teams on that road trip, and they dropped every one of those games. But the Toronto Raptors have peeled off 2 wins in a row because A, they're playing at home, and B, they are starting to put it together. And when you watch the games, the Toronto Raptors have been in a lot of close losses this season. They have lost some heartbreakers against some very good teams. The Boston Celtics are one of the teams that they almost were able to beat in their building. It had to go to overtime, and they lost on a buzzer beater. That was one game which was just a possession away from being a win. They did another one of those games against the Pistons. It was very frustrating to watch. I think that with the return of Scottie Barnes, who is certainly a very competent late game player, he is a player that you can put the ball into the hands of in the fourth quarter. He can help run your offense. He can make shots. He can make plays. And on defense, he can make plays as well. The Toronto Raptors need guys who can make plays on both ends of the court, and Scottie Barnes had a number of big plays last night, especially on the defensive end, steals, really smart plays, like when he called to the ref to make sure that they saw that Rudy Gobert had overstayed his welcome in the paint. He got an offensive 3 in the key call. He is a very heady player. Another thing that he did that was very smart was that he told the ref that Naz Reid delivered a 2-hand push while he was airborne. Sometimes the refs miss things like that, but Scottie Barnes very clearly went to the ref, told him, hey, Naz Reid pushed me with 2 hands on my body. He was not making a play on the ball, and I was airborne. That is automatically a flagrant foul. You don't even, as long as those things happen, 1, a player is airborne, 2, it is 2 hands on the player pushing them, that's an automatic flagrant. And Scottie Barnes is just knowing the rules. Like, of course, basketball players and players who play a sport for a living, you expect them to know the rules, but just having the ability to recall, like have in your brain just at a moment's notice, the ability to know exactly what rule the opponent is breaking and then bringing that to the official's attention, that's something that is invaluable. I have seen guys like LeBron do this all of the time. Kyle Lowry used to do this. They know what the other team, what rules the team they're playing are breaking, and telling the ref about it. That is effective. And he brings a lot to the table, but you can tell that just the ability to think the game and make sure that the Raptors are going to have every opportunity down the stretch in order to put a team away, like the Timberwolves, who are very good. You require guys like that. And Scottie Barnes is wise beyond his years. He is a young veteran, and you could tell when he's on the sideline, what he's saying to guys. He's coaching them. He is giving them motivation, giving them advice. You can tell that this guy is completely dialed into the game, and having him back is going to make a difference in the win-loss column. You saw it last night. I think you're going to see it coming up. We got to look at the schedule. The schedule is one of the main factors when determining how successful a team can be. And so we got to look at what the Raptors have coming up. The next game, I'm not too confident about. They play the Cleveland Cavaliers in Cleveland. So that's going to be a very tough game. They've only dropped one game this season against the Boston Celtics. So that one will be tough. But then they play the Detroit Pistons. Pistons are doing better this season, but that is a winnable game, even though it's in Detroit. With Scottie back, I am looking pretty optimistically at that. The Pelicans have been kind of a disaster this season. They really have been hit hard by injuries. Their team construction doesn't make a ton of sense. They don't look very good, even though they are playing in New Orleans. That's another winnable game. Miami Heat are a solid team. They can beat any team in the league on any given night, but they haven't had an amazing record this season. They've lost some games. They've lost to the Pistons. That is a game that they could win. It is in their building, but then they follow it up with a 7-game home stretch. And I've mentioned that in the past, where that is where the Toronto Raptors could make hay and win a decent amount of games. They play the Heat again, so it's a back-to-back against the Heat in their building, then the Heat in the Toronto Raptors building. Then the Pacers, who they've already beaten this season, they play the Thunder. They play the Mavericks. The Mavericks have looked like a beatable team this season. I've watched a couple of their games. Luke is still working his way back into shape. He hasn't looked great. The team as a whole has not looked very good. The Knicks are good this season. I don't know if you can say that the Raptors are going to win that one, but who knows? The Nets have been a surprise this season, but I think that's another winnable game. And then the Houston Rockets have been good this season, so maybe not there. But there is a stretch of games where they should be in almost every single one of those games. The Toronto Raptors have played a lot of games this season where they have been neck and neck with opponents going into the fourth quarter, maybe even leading opponents going into the fourth quarter, and they haven't been able to put it away. With the return of Scottie Barnes and his ability to play in the fourth quarter, I think he's a very good fourth quarter player. That means that they are going to start winning some of these games, knock on wood. I think that their days of losing 80, 70, 80% of their games are kind of over. I think we're going to start seeing the Toronto Raptors start going 500 as the season goes on. And for people who are into tanking, maybe they want to see Cooper Flagg wearing a Toronto Raptors uniform, that's probably not very good news. I am going to say that I don't know if you should waste a start as bad as the Toronto Raptors had this season. They started the season miserably. This is about as poor a record as you could hope for. But they were in last place for a decent chunk of the season so far. It's a big hole to climb out of. I love watching them win games. I love these guys. They have shown so much heart and hustle and determination and grit, and they're playing the right way, and the system looks really good. I just am very pleased with how everything is starting to come together. But with that said, do you really want to fall out of a very strong draft class just by being a competent basketball club? Tough to say, really tough to say. And there are two guys that the Toronto Raptors really need to win games, and they were very good last night, but they've been good all season long, and they are two veteran players who might have some strong interest around the league from playoff teams. Those two players being, of course, Jakob Pöltl and Chris Boucher, who had another great game last night. But Chris Boucher has been the spark off of the bench for the Toronto Raptors. He has delivered the scoring punch that they have desperately needed. His ability to shoot a little bit, his ability to get hot and play with energy and score on teams, that's going to be a coveted thing on the trade market. I think that there are some teams that would be looking at him as a guy who could help buoy their second unit. And then, of course, Jakob Pöltl. I've discussed at length that he is going to be a hot commodity on the trade market for teams that are looking for centers. I think he has played superbly. I love what he brings to the table for the Toronto Raptors. He is a very solid player that does all the little things that you want for a team. The screens that he is setting have unlocked some of the players on the team. But if you are trying to lose games and you are trying to build for the future, let's say like you punt this season and say, we'll start again next season, the guy that would be most instrumental in bringing down the Jenga pile that is the Toronto Raptors would be Jakob Pöltl. If you wanted for them to lose most of their games for the remainder of the season, they don't have another competent big man, especially a guy who stands 7 foot. Trading Jakob Pöltl would be a way to punt the season and make sure that they go back to losing most of their games. It sounds like, I don't even know if I should be saying it because it sounds so awful to say. Like, do you really want to go back to watching the Toronto Raptors play without a center? Do you really want to go back to them struggling again, watching guys have to go through prolonged losing streaks? It would hurt my heart for sure, but brain versus heart, I don't know. Do you want the Toronto Raptors to be in contention for one of the strongest draft classes in the past, 5 years or so? Very tough question, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. But that's kind of what I'm feeling about the Toronto Raptors. Do they want to compete? Should they be building on the success that they have? Should they be maybe looking to tear it down, punt the season, come back again next season? Those are my thoughts on where the Toronto Raptors stand. I think they're going to be a lot better with Scottie Barnes in the lineup. Okay, let's get into the player evaluations. We got to start with the best player on the floor last night, and yes, that was RJ Barrett. RJ Barrett has been really phenomenal. He has bounced back from his really disappointing road trip where he had that stretch of 3 games where he looked very bad, and there's some very encouraging signs from last night. Well, I'll mention them after I read off his stat line because it'll flow pretty nicely there. RJ Barrett, 31 points on 10 of 14 shooting, 1 of 3 from 3-point range, 10 of 12 from the free throw stripe, 7 rebounds, 3 assists, 3 steals, and 4 turnovers. RJ Barrett was very efficient last night, okay? 31 points on 14 shots and 10 of 12 from the free throw lines. Very encouraging. And one of the most encouraging things about it was the fact that he did it against Rudy Gobert. I've mentioned in my last episode when I talked about what RJ does well, what RJ struggles against, one of the things that he struggles against that I mentioned in that episode, rim protection. If a team has a very strong rim protector and they can cut off his avenues to the basket, he really struggles because his shot is very iffy and he needs to get to the basket in order to be efficient. Oh boy, he had a great game last night, and I think that he has done a very good job of leveraging the attention that Jakob Pöltl gets in the pick and roll in order to get to the basket and score. So the Minnesota Timberwolves, perhaps on the scouting report, maybe they looked at the Boston Celtics game where RJ Barrett was looking like Steve Nash getting into the paint, and because they brought 2 to the ball and they left everybody else at home on the shooters, Jakob Pöltl was open over and over and over and over again, and RJ Barrett was able to make the pass to Pöltl, who kept hitting floaters and layups, etc. Perhaps they watched that game and they didn't want to get beaten the same way, and so they played more traditionally. They had 1 on the ball, and then Gobert had to split the difference between Pöltl and RJ and could not get as deep into the paint as perhaps when you saw him play against the Milwaukee Bucks, where he had that complete disaster, where they were just really loading up on him and he couldn't get it going. Last night, he managed to beat Gobert to the glass multiple times. In certain coverages, Gobert was way out of position, and RJ Barrett is so fast once he gets his dribble going. He may not have the greatest first step, but once he has the ball in his hands and he's driving, he is so fast getting to that basket. And he beat Gobert there over and over and over again, managed to get a whole bunch of layups while Gobert was standing in the paint. So very impressive night from RJ. He had it really going, and he delivered a lot of strong performances down the stretch of the game. He managed to make a bunch of layups. He had a bunch of steals last night. I thought that his off-ball defense, when usually it's not very good, last night he had it going, and I think that part of that was because Minnesota's playing without a point guard. Mike Conley has been out for them. So RJ was really able to take advantage of playing the passing lanes. And without a point guard, and you're relying on Anthony Edwards, he is not a great playmaker, and a lot of the passes that they made last night were very telegraphed or wild, and RJ Barrett was able to read that and pick the ball fantastic performance for RJ. Next, let's go to Scottie Barnes. Scottie Barnes was on a minutes restriction. Of course, we're used to seeing Scottie Barnes play 35 plus minutes a game, but he only played 27 minutes last night. Obviously, he's recovering from an injury. They're trying to bring him back slowly, the minutes restriction, probably to get him back up to speed. He did not show any signs of rust. I thought he looked fantastic. He had a whole bunch of really nice passes and dimes, especially in the first half. Those glasses did not seem to obstruct his vision because he had a couple of high degree of difficulty passes. Just, it is a joy to watch him play the game of basketball again. I'm so glad he's back. And I think that he did a good job of, in the first half, incorporating himself back into the rotation. You don't want to see a player come in and say, this is my team, get off the ball, RJ, I'm going to take over here. He didn't do that. He has the ability to understand what the team was doing without him and trying to work himself in and complement that rather than just right off the bat trying to take control and having like a huge ego in that way. I don't think he's built like that. And then when the team needs him to do that kind of stuff, guess when? The fourth quarter. That has been the nightmare quarter for the Toronto Raptors. They have blown so many leads in the fourth quarter. They had been playing teams very competently and even leading in the fourth quarter, and then everything just slips away. They get outclassed in the fourth quarter. And Scottie Barnes has that quality to him where he doesn't shrink in the big moments, and he has the mental fortitude to make the right play and trust in himself and his teammates. Just do the correct thing most of the time, whether that's on defense, whether that's on offense. I think that he had a great game, great return to form. Love seeing him back in a Raptors uniform. I think they're going to win a lot of games with him. Next up, we'll go in descending order in terms of how good their game was. Next up was Jakob Pöltl, another very solid performance. And what's great about Pöltl is the scalability. When he was needed to step up and take a bunch of touches, he could do that. He didn't seem to be bothered by having to take 20 shots a game. There's not a ton of centers who could take 20 shots a game because their offensive game is too limited. Pöltl seems to have all of these little elements that they called on that he can contribute on offense, not just with the screening, not just with dunking. Some players can pretty much only layups and dunks, that's it. He has little fun moves that he has that they don't look very pretty, but they work. He has like a pump fake on his floater that he turns into a dribble drive, very short little move. He got Gobert with that last night. He has a bunch of crafty little moves around the basket. I thought that he looked really good. And then on defense, 12 rebounds, 9 defensive rebounds. They really, really need him inside in order to secure rebounds. He had a tough night because Randall and Gobert, and they have a bunch of tall players, Naz Reid, a whole bunch of players who are very big and like to stand around in the paint and grab offensive rebounds. So he had his hands full there. It wasn't always pretty, but without him, they would have just gotten absolutely mauled in the paint, and they didn't. And I think that he outplayed Rudy Gobert, especially with the brain farts that Rudy Gobert commits during the game. Rudy Gobert is kind of a dick, and he has an ego. He thinks he should be getting shots that he really does not deserve. Jakob Pöltl is not like that. He is a very selfless player. He will set as many screens as he needs to in order for you to get a good look. He will take whatever is given to him, and then he will do his job, what you ask of him, without the attitude. And I think that his veteran presence has given a huge lift to the Toronto Raptors and made them play the right way. I mean, I love watching him play. I think that he's a really positive player. Like, he contributes so much to winning, if that's what you want. Next up, we'll talk about Gradey Dick. I don't think Gradey Dick had a fantastic night. He was being covered very, very closely by Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Gradey Dick is now on the scouting report. He was the Raptors' #2 option for that long stretch without Immanuel Quickley, without Scottie Barnes. He was the guy that teams had to pay attention to. So other teams are going to put you on the scouting report and do stuff to disrupt your game. One of the good things about being a shooter and demanding off-ball attention is that it opens up the rest of the team. Why do you think that RJ Barrett and Jakob Pöltl are so effective in the pick and roll? Well, one of the reasons is that they can't add Gradey Dick's defender to help shut it off. If Gradey Dick is on the perimeter and moving around, anything that you run where he is not a part of the play, his defender cannot be part of the play. So if you have RJ Barrett and Jakob Pöltl running a pick and roll, they can't help off of Gradey. They did help off of Gradey one time. It was pretty much the only little shot of daylight that Gradey Dick got the entire game because he was being guarded so heavily, and he just knocked down an open three on the wing. Every time you talk about him, you have to talk about the gravity, because he does have shooting gravity that the Toronto Raptors leverage very well when he's on the floor. So even though he only had 9 points, I think he did a pretty good job on offense. He's always running off of screens and creating space for players. He did have a really cool moment as well. He only had 1 assist on the game, but it was an impressive assist. He threw a lob to RJ at the end of the game. It brought the house down. It literally like broke the speakers in the ACC. It like glitched out. It hit the red, kind of garbled the sound. It was so loud. That sweet pass to RJ, it looked like he wasn't going to see RJ. He was looking him off all the way down the floor, but it was just a ruse. He passed it to RJ, perfectly hitting him in the air with an alley-oop pass for a no doubt about it slam dunk that sealed the game pretty much and gave the Toronto Raptors the victory. So he has to be given credit for that. Unfortunately, we'll talk about the downsides. His handle is being picked at by teams. I think that when teams see him, they are trying to pick his pocket. They are attacking his dribble because his dribble is still pretty high. It is not the tightest one on the team. He requires a couple of moves and counter moves while being pressured with the ball in his hands. That's something that he needs to improve upon. Of course, he is good when he is hit in stride and it's a straight line drive to the basket, or he's coming off of a screen, or perhaps attacking a closeout when he has the advantage already. But when he doesn't have the advantage and it's simply a one-on-one with his defender, like Nickeil Alexander-Walker was able to strip him a couple of times. So he needs to get better there. I thought his defense was pretty good. Of course, they're trying to hide him a little bit on defense. They're not giving him the toughest covers, but they employ a lot of switching. So eventually the teams can get it to that so that he is guarding one of their best perimeter players. And he has not looked that bad. It's not great. I'm not going to say shutting guys down, but he can do an okay job of guiding players into the help defense. And he has also worked a lot on his contests. I feel like when it's an X out, when it's a scramble, when there is a guy open on the perimeter and you really just have to get a guy out there contesting a shot, he gets out there and he does an effective job contesting the shot without fouling. So that's a good thing. I think that he has a lot of room to grow, and I think that he could become a good defender eventually. And glad to see he's taking steps in that department. Last up, I think probably one of his worst games of the season, because he has had such a fantastic season as a role player, was Ochai Agbaji. I think that he was trying his best with Anthony Edwards. As I've mentioned, Anthony Edwards is one of the most lethal scoring threats in the NBA. He has an unbelievable set of moves that can get you going one way, he goes the other way. He kind of put Ochai in a blender a couple of times last night, and when he gets it going from 3, he's super tough to stop. So I don't think it was a great night on the defensive end for Ochai. He has had a whole bunch of really good nights, so I'm not too concerned, but I just have to put it out there. He's had better defensive performances. And then on offense, he didn't really contribute that much. 4 points on 5 shots, 0 rebounds, 1 assist, 1 steal, 1 turnover. A rare invisible night for him on offense. I have been so over the moon about his performances this season because he's done such a fantastic job that, you know, guys have bad nights and totally forgivable, but hope to see him bounce back in the next game. And now we move to the bench, where some of the star players for the Toronto Raptors were being kept. Number 1, Chris Boucher. What a night from Chris Boucher. He had 22 points on 13 shots. He was 3 of 8 from 3, 5 of 8 from the free throw line, 4 rebounds, 2 steals, a block, and a turnover. Fantastic performance from Chris Boucher. He was kind of tearing up the Timberwolves off the dribble, hitting threes. He caught a couple of passes on the inside. He's very good at cuts. He is a polished scorer. I mean, when you think about a bench player and you think about a guy who is a 6th man, the number 1 thing is buckets. That is really important for a team, is to get production off of the bench. Keep yourself afloat in those minutes with scoring. And you can be more selfish when you are a bench player. Everybody talks about he's never met a shot he doesn't like. That's good. You want a guy who has that supreme confidence in themselves to just hoist up 3-point shots. Hey, if there is a role in the NBA where it is okay to call your own number over and over and over again, it is the 6th man role, and he's doing that. And when he gets mixed in with the starters, they're kind of looking for him. And he poses a problem for other teams because his shot is hard to block because it's so high. You can't really put a guard on him because he can shoot over them. And then if you put a big on him, he can drive past them. He had a really awesome closeout attack last night where he blew past, I believe it was Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who was closing out too hard, and then had a nice crossover where he was able to get right to the rim and dunk it. It was a spectacular drive from the three-point line, looked really smooth. So Chris Boucher, yeah, he has been one of the best Raptors so far this season, easily the best bench player for the Toronto Raptors. He has been kind of carrying the water off the second unit. Very pleased with his performance. Next up, Davion Mitchell, who was awesome, okay? His problem, I've mentioned, has been the scoring, so he didn't do himself any favors. So I'm going to kind of like contradict myself here. He had 3 points on 0 of 4 shooting. All of his points came at the free throw stripe, but that was one of the best 0 for 4 in 27 minutes performances I've ever seen. The guy was unreal on defense. He completely rooked Rob Dillingham. He had him in jail. Rob Dillingham ended the game with 2 points on 2 shots. One of them was when he kind of got an ISO against Chris Boucher and was able to use his quickness. But every other time when he was being guarded by Davion Mitchell, he was in jail. He had to give the ball up. He could not do anything. And he's one of their only ball handlers on Minnesota. And then when it came to playing against Ant, the most effective player last night, and the one who got under his skin and was so annoying, just a huge thorn in the side of Anthony Edwards, was off night, was Davion Mitchell. He was just being a mega pest, really bothering Anthony Edwards, following him around. You could hear Anthony Edwards chirping to the refs saying, "This guy's fouling me, this guy's fouling me, he's fouling me." Just because Davion Mitchell's just constantly there. He's doing little things like to bug you. He's inside your area. You can't get a shot off against him very easily. Just a really, really, really pleasing performance from him. He had 8 assists with 3 turnovers. So again, I'm not going to say he's like a stellar playmaker, but he is making the basic passes that you need, and he is trying to do a good job of distributing the ball. He is not a selfish player, but just on the defensive end was a menace, absolutely a menace. And he was credited with 0 steals, which is kind of surprising to me because it felt like he was generating turnovers, just being around. I felt like he was so disruptive on defense. I'm just surprised he didn't walk away with even 1 steal. There's only one other guy I want to talk about off of the bench, and that is Jonathan Mogbo. I think that he had a solid game off of the bench. He had a bunch of offensive rebounds, 5 offensive rebounds. That's really impressive. A lot of those with Gobert on the floor, so he was getting in there. He hit a really nice push shot in Gobert's face. Gobert was coming out to contest. That's the way that you beat a shot blocker, is with that mid-range push shot. He was able to hit that. 6 points, 7 rebounds, 3 of 6 from the field, 1 assist, 1 steal, 1 turnover. And on defense, I think that he did a good job covering Randall. I know Randall shot a ton of free throws last night. Some of those were against Jonathan Mogbo. He finished with 4 fouls, but he made him work. It wasn't easy. He was staying in front of him. He was trying his best to disrupt them. I think that the team in general was very disruptive last night. And yes, they got called for a ton of fouls in the first half, but they got up onto this Minnesota team that lacked a point guard. That is huge. When a team lacks a point guard, you're going to be trying to create turnovers. You're going to be trying to get up onto them. You don't want them to be able to get into their sets easily. That's one of the benefits of having a point guard, is that they can handle the ball under pressure. They can get players into their sets, get players the ball in their spots. It doesn't look rushed. When a team doesn't have that, they can start to get flustered. They throw bad passes. They can't get into their sets. One of the biggest problems with Anthony Edwards as a player, I mean, he's a fantastic scorer, but he's not the type of playmaker that you would expect from one of the top guards in the league. So Luka Doncic or LeBron or Shai Gilgeous-Alexander or some of these other players are much better at distributors and much better with the ball in their hands, that can create plays for players, that are the lead ball handler. He still needs to work on that. He is not a guy that can run an offense smoothly. And that is kind of why they went out and got Mike Conley, is because he's kind of the training wheels for this team. He's a guy that they need in order to run a smooth offense. Minnesota Timberwolves had 17 turnovers. The Raptors also had 17 turnovers. So it's not like the Raptors did a great job in that department, but I felt like in terms of making Minnesota work to get going and get into their sets and have their offense function, I think the Toronto Raptors were super effective at not letting them do that. Minnesota only shot 41% from the field. The Raptors were 10 better than that. They shot 51% from the field. They were far more effective on offense. And when you are doing that and the possessions are about even, you're going to win the game. And the Toronto Raptors did. And they managed to survive the fourth quarter because they've done that so many times this season. They've given you hope and then they've blown it. And that's usually a sign of a young team. They play competitively for the first three quarters. The other team takes it serious and then they out-veteran them and win the game because they know how to do that. With Scottie Barnes back, they're going to win more close games. So, yeah, up next, I've already mentioned who they're playing. It is going to be a tough game. They are playing the Cleveland Cavaliers on Sunday. So they've got a bit of a rest period. They will be playing at 7:30 in Cleveland. Cleveland has been on a roll. They are one of the best teams in the league, if not the best team in the league. The chemistry on their team is off the charts. So that's a tough game. But hopefully the Raptors can give them a fight. They have been in it against a lot of teams this season that have better records. They've made it a dogfight. So excited to see that one. And yeah, that's the episode. I hope you enjoyed. Hope you took something away from it. What do you think the Toronto Raptors should do? Are you of the opinion that they are probably going to win a lot more? Or do you think that this is just a hot streak? They're going to fall right back down to where they were, into the gutter? Do you think that they need to make trades? Do you think that, hey, to hell with tanking, let's see what this team can do? Please let me know here in the comments and also on Twitter and Blue Sky, same handle there. You can reach me at Raps Report. I always love hearing from other Raptors fans, and I'll do my best to answer your comments if you have them. And as always, thank you for tuning in to Raptors Report, your source for in-depth Raptors content.